In the ACI 6.2.1 release, we have brought a number of pretty impressive improvements, in my opinion. And one of those improvements that I want to go into detail in this series of videos is the APIC upgrade process and how we have enhanced that. So let's dig in. So if you go to the release notes for 6.2.1, you'll notice this as a new software feature, enhanced APIC cluster upgrade. Now, this is really a combination of a bunch of different things, which all result in making this process not only better, more reliable, but also faster. So let's kind of take a look and see what we mean by this particular new feature. So there's a couple of categories here. First, let's talk about the centralized upgrade workflow. For the first time ever, we're able to do the SIMC upgrade directly from the APIC UI. If you remember in the past, you had to download the ISO, boot the whole server from it, go into the SIMC. It was a very manual process just to update those server level components. And then you would go and upgrade the APIC second. It was a very manual process. And so we've improved that workflow. I'm not going to show that in this video. I will likely show that in another video, but let's move forward. One of the other improvements is the whole pre-upgrade validation. Now, you probably remember the script. We've made improvements. We've automated that. We've made it a much smoother process, and I'll show you what that looks like. Next, if we talk about the architecture, and this is where I'm actually quite excited because engineering went through and re-architected how the APIC software components are actually built. And that not only results in a more stable APIC, but it opened up the opportunity for us to have a new upgrade process that's much more reliable and much faster. And I'll show you some details around what I mean by that. But let's actually dig into the upgrade enhancement first. So if you imagine before 6.2.1, if you needed to upgrade your APIC and upgrade the server hardware components through the SIMC, it was a multi-stage, somewhat manual process. So the first thing you needed to do was, go to a web browser, download the pre-upgrade validation script, because we always encourage you to have the latest version of that. You download this Python script, you copy it over to your APICs, and then you run it from the APIC CLI. It works great, but it's a very manual process, and we can do better. Then when it comes time to updating the SIMC hardware components first, you would download the HUU ISO from cisco.com. You would mount it. You would boot the whole server from that ISO and run through the firmware workflow of, upgrading all those components. Then you would reboot again, and then you would go into stage 3, which would be actually upgrading the APIC software itself. So what does that look like now in 6.2.1? So stage 1 is you no longer have to go out and look for the latest version of the pre-upgrade validation script. We're actually keeping that for you. And then APIC will make a connection, in this case to Intersite, and say, hey, Intersite, give me the latest version, and I'll use that to run all of the proper checks so that I know I can proceed with a safe and successful upgrade. That is all within the APIC UI. So none of this copying and CLI business, it's right in the APIC UI. Staying within the APIC UI, when it comes time to upgrade the SIMC, we've downloaded the SIMC HUU ISO, but we've put it in the APIC repository. And then through the APIC UI, we'll use that to upgrade SIMC. Again, not going to show that part in this video. I'll do a separate video for that later. And then stage 3, again, still in the APIC UI, we're going to proceed to upgrading the APIC software itself. And that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of these videos. Okay, so let's take a look at the other thing that I mentioned, how our engineering team has re-architected how the software components of APIC come together. If you look at the image on the left, this is the sort of existing way, what we've known for, the last 10 years of ACI. Whereas if we make a change to any of the layers, any of the components, it effectively means we have to reboot everything. We have to reboot the whole server to have those changes take effect. If you look at the image on the right, this is the change. This is the improvement. We've done some containerization a bit further, where we've now been able to separate the hardware, the kernel, the OS from the other components, like some of the foundational stuff versus the APIC process. And so the result here is once you are in ACI 6.2 something, so 6.2.1, we only need to reboot those components that we change when we upgrade to the next version and the next version beyond. So I've kind of tried to capture some improvements in terms of time. If it is option 1 and we're only touching those few foundational components, restarting those could just be a couple of seconds at most, right? And that's kind of awesome. So if there was just a bug or an improvement in the API gateway, let's just patch that and not have to reboot anything. If we're talking about, let's say, more sophisticated APIC level processes, option number 2, that is now only a couple of minutes at most as we restart those whole processes, but we didn't have to reboot the whole box. And then if we are touching the kernel, if we are touching the OS, that is a bit more of a bigger change, and we would have to reboot all of that. And so option 3, we measure somewhere roughly around 7 minutes or so, but we don't have to reboot the hardware, just all of the software that's running on. So the result is, in all 3 options, in ACI 6.2.1 and beyond, the upgrade process is measurably faster, which I think would make everybody happy. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about here is this reliable upgrade orchestration. Now, what do I mean by that? So before 6.2.1, when you did an APIC cluster upgrade, it was kind of like each APIC was its own island, and it would kind of go through its own upgrade process and not necessarily coordinating with the other 2. Like each APIC was going to be updated as a discrete individual member of the cluster. And that's okay, but we, again, think we could do better here. And so what we're doing in 6.2.1 is we're looking at the cluster as a whole, and we're orchestrating the whole upgrade process from APIC 1. So APIC 1 kind of acts as that central arbiter for all of the steps that need to happen, the upgrades, the validations, the checks. All of that stuff will happen from APIC number 1 in coordination with later on APIC 2, APIC 3, and then looking at the cluster as a whole. So this is much more, let's say, cohesive when it does it this way by orchestrating from APIC number 1. And I'm actually going to show this live in the next video. Okay, so there are a couple of design considerations, limitations, and guidelines. As always, you want to read that documentation, make sure that you understand the upgrade process. In this particular case, the first one that I need to call out for you is, because of the architecture change that I just described, once you go to 6.2.1, you are not able to downgrade to something before 6.2.1. This is not supported. So please, when you are ready to upgrade, let's just make sure that you are aware of this, that you are going to be on a new baseline of 6.2 and beyond. Now, in the extreme case where you did the upgrade, but you, for some reason, wanted to go back to an earlier version before 6.2.1, it is possible to go back, but I should point out that it is very disruptive, and this is like only in the extreme case. You can back up your config, wipe the whole cluster, reinstall the whole cluster from ISO using that older version, and then restore. Again, that's extremely disruptive, as you might realize. Now, once you're on the 6.2 release, so in this case, we're going to 6.2.1, you are able to upgrade and downgrade within other 6.2x and beyond releases. So if you were going to 6.2.3 or 6.2.4 maintenance release and you wanted to upgrade or downgrade within that major train, no problem. The next step is, and I mentioned this before, because APIC 1 is our central orchestrator of this whole process, you must launch the workflow from APIC 1. In fact, APIC 2 and 3 won't even let you do it. They'll refer you back to APIC 1, as we'll see in the next video. And then the last thing, common sense, you won't be able to update both the SIMC and the APIC in the same workflow at the same time. Those are still discrete processes. I mean, it's pretty obvious. One is sort of hardware level components and the other is the software. But the workflow process is the same workflow. You just do it at different times. Okay, now let's get to the exciting part. I'm going to end this video, and in the next video, I'm actually going to show you this process live in my lab. So let's get to it.